HIV/AIDS is well known and a serious disease that has been around for 40 years and has infected more than 86 million people and taken the lives of more than 40 million worldwide, according to the World Health Organization. On this week's episode of Our Voices, we are reflecting on these numbers as we commemorate on the December 1st World HIV/AIDS Day. We're looking at communities that are vulnerable and what support the people living in those communities need in order to lead normal lives, stay healthy, and live longer. We also ask people living with HIV/AIDS about their daily challenges and whether the war against HIV/AIDS, stigma, and discrimination is being won. Now, ladies, as we commemorate HIV and AIDS in this year of 2022, in your region, what are the key issues that are sticking up, that are coming up more?
I mean, all over the world, progress has been made when coming to HIV/AIDS. But if you ask me about Ethiopia, for example, a lot of research indicate that the country has made a lot of progress in controlling the prevalence of HIV/AIDS, but in among key populations and in urban areas, the prevalence rate remains to be high. And also providing support and services for people living with HIV/AIDS still remains to be a challenge.
Yeah, if I separate like the challenges and the medication is different. Now there is a centers that provide a free medications, which we never had it in where I'm from, Somalia. But now the stigma still exists. And the denial of the disease too
Still exists.
People believe like, no, this is not something we can have it because of we believe this or we do this. So still the denial exists. The stigma is very high.
Yeah, I think the stigma and the discrimination, especially, it exists in many parts of the country. People still live in
especially
fear.
conservative communities where people are not expected to be sexually active and using drugs and so forth. But there, like you said, has been progress in terms of what's been going on around the world. For instance, in Burundi, where I cover a lot, this past Monday, the Ministry of Health stated that 90% of the people who are HIV and AIDS positive and are taking medication, the disease in their body is almost undetectable because they're consistently taking their medication. So there has been some progress.
Yeah, we'll be talking more about this. But first, let's go to Kenya. In 1984, Kenya confirmed its first case of HIV/AIDS. Nearly 4 decades later, the country has a youthful population that was born HIV positive and have experienced a roller coaster of challenges, including stigma. Some teenage girls who were born with the virus say they are being forced to live a secret life because they are scared of being picked on due to their status. Sharon Baranga reports from Nairobi, Kenya.
Teenagehood is a stage in life where one gets to explore and discover themselves. But for many, like Aisha and Amina, not their real names, it was a time when life threw a curveball at them, one which they did not expect. The girls were born HIV positive, and we met them in their neighborhood at Mukuru Kwanjenga Informal Settlement in Nairobi, Kenya. For Aisha, life was normal until she became sickly at the age of 12.
I was weak.
I used to cough, I was weak, and I did not have appetite for food. My mom then took me to Coptic Hospital where I was tested and found to be HIV positive. It is then that I started taking my medication. There are people who are in denial of their HIV status, and some would want to spread the virus deliberately.
Amina's story is similar to that of Aisha.
When I was in class 6, I observed that my mom would always grind a pill into powder and then she would give me. I always asked her why she was giving me the pills, but all she said was that I had a chest problem. But when I got to class 7, she confessed that she has been afraid to disclose that I was HIV positive. But now that I had grown up, she felt it was time I knew my status. She said I was born HIV positive.
The revelation of being HIV positive did not sit well with Aisha and Amina.
I was angry. We began to quarrel. That day I slept outside.
It was sad. It was truly sad.
I can vividly remember that day. I did not even eat.
Susan Ateka, a community health volunteer and who works closely with teenagers who are HIV positive in Mukuru kwa Njenga, has a cardinal assignment, that of ensuring the youth infected with HIV take their medication consistently and that their mental needs are well taken care of. We always advise parents to ensure their children are aware of the medication they're taking by the time they are 10 years old. In its 2018 report, the National AIDS Control Council in Kenya reported that the HIV prevalence among males and females aged between 15 and 24 years was estimated at 1.34% and 2.61% in 2017, while the overall HIV prevalence was 1.98%, which means there were 184,718 young adults living with HIV in 2017. In that year, new HIV infections were approximately 52,800 across all ages, 44,800 among people above the age of 15 and 8,000 among children aged below 14 years. In 2021, Kenya recorded 28 HIV-related deaths among 10 to 19-year-olds. Sharon Baranga for Voice of America in Nairobi, Kenya.
Thanks, Sharon Baranga, for that story. Let us go a bit further in our discussion and assess the lives of people born and living with HIV/AIDS. We have with us today Dr. Pauline Mushina, a public education and advocacy coordinator for the African region at the American Friends Service Committee, where she has worked on sexual and reproductive rights while fighting to end gender-based violence. Dr. Pauline is also a former senior partnership advisor for UNAIDS. Welcome, Dr. Munjin.
Thank you.
When you look after 40 years in Africa, how is the stigma? Still, an HIV patient struggle with that?
Thank you very much. I think stigma is still a hindrance to HIV prevention in the continent of Africa, especially when you imagine that most young people and especially young girls don't know how to protect themselves from HIV infection because of the taboos surrounding sexuality in the African context. So the challenge is there, and it's not only among girls but also other populations. But stigma has played a role in the sense that you hear that girl saying that her mother did not even tell her she was HIV positive until she was 12 years old. So most parents would prefer to let their children live without knowledge that HIV is in their body because of stigma. And they are treated so badly. Just 2 years ago, we lost a girl who was living with HIV, but she couldn't take her medication at school because she was afraid of other students watching her taking medication and asking her questions about her HIV status, and yet she was born with it. So its stigma continues to hamper us to have an effective prevention strategy for HIV, and also to keep people living with HIV alive and vibrant through medication.
While stigma and discrimination continues to be a challenge, especially in the last 2-3 years, COVID-19 also stretched resources, weakened immunity. So how did it impact the progress made in the last 4 decades in terms of prevention or in terms of providing support for people living with the virus?
Thank you so much. COVID-19 has impacted almost every part of our lives. And for people living with HIV, accessing services, whether it is treatment, whether it is testing for their viral loads, became very complicated because most health services began to focus only on COVID and excluded everything else. And because of that, most of the programs that were working on HIV were not as effective as they have been. So it's been a challenge. And of course, we know that most resources also were directed towards COVID-19.
Right, and I'm glad you mentioned the resources, Dr. Muchina. So where should resources now be focused on mostly? Is the prevention, is the advocacy, and we've talked about also the mental needs part because of the stigma. Where should resources be allocated right now?
Well, I think they should be allocated in all sectors, but the most important one is prevention. Because if we don't prevent, for example, more children being born with HIV, we are not going to end the pandemic. And if we don't prevent, make sure that people who are living with HIV have medication, because when they take medication, their viral load is lower and they are able not to pass the virus to someone else. So you see, we cannot emphasize one and leave the others. But we have to target the marginalized population, especially in Africa and Kenya, my home country. I think it's very important to target 14 to 24 years old because the girls especially are vulnerable to HIV infection more than the boys in that age category. But also, sorry, you wanted to ask a question. Sorry.
No, we'll continue this conversation, Dr. Muchina, an expert on reproductive rights. We'll be back with you, but now it's time for a break. We want to remind you to visit us on social media. We are on Facebook at VOA Africa, on Instagram and Twitter. We are on VOA Our Voices. We are also on WhatsApp, and our number is US country code +1 202 503 9025. When we return, we will discuss more on prevention and solutions against HIV/AIDS.
From around the world, let's go.
Welcome back. You are watching Our Voices. We are discussing HIV/AIDS in Africa. Let us dive into prevention method and the solutions. Dr. Muchina, thank you for being here. Now let us hear from people living with HIV/AIDS in Uganda and in Tanzania and the challenges they seek to overcome each and every day.
Young people living with HIV and generally people living with HIV face a very big and common problem of stigma. They are not allowed to associate with people because society still has this belief that, you know, when you're living with HIV, you can transmit the virus through sharing, maybe a cup, a plate, you know, all those other things. All my life I grew up thinking, okay, I am HIV positive. What can I do? I wasn't able to participate maybe in competitions. I wasn't able to go out with friends. I wasn't able to socialize because I looked at myself and was like, this virus, you know, it weakened my mind. It weakened my perspective about life. And I became a loner. And so that is a challenge very many other young people like me are going through.
So I actually feel that we have won the war against HIV and AIDS. We are getting there due to the fact that we have a lot of people that have accepted their status and they're taking their daily medication, which is adherence.
With so many strategic programs going on, so many people are happy to actually speak about HIV and AIDS. We are teachers of each other, we are educators. So I feel that we are at a place where one is able to actually go to any medical institution to go and get, you know, drugs. What needs to be done, of course, increase the awareness. The awareness is there, increase the awareness, and then just break the barrier for us to be able to, for us not to sit in one space and not just touch the topic about HIV or AIDS.
Stigma is not that much, but it is still there. According to the people that we meet in the field, it is still there. And even in social media, maybe if you have posted something about HIV, you still find some comments of people that you see. These ones, they are still stigmatizing people who are living with HIV.
I think there's a lot of information that needs to go out there in the compounds where people should be informed in local languages. People should be counseled. People should be told to say, look, even when you are sick, you can still live a positive life.
On my side, I don't have any challenge because I've accepted myself. I'm adhering to my ARVs. I have disclosed my status to my partner. Everyone knows about my status, so I don't have any challenge.
It's always really great to hear those uncommon voices and the things that they have to go through. Now, we are with Dr. Muchina. Dr. Muchina Paulina is a public education and advocacy coordinator, she's helping us to understand more about prevention and pretty much a lot of things about HIV and AIDS in this time that we're commemorating HIV and AIDS of 2022. Dr. Muchina, we know, let's shift a little bit on the communities that are very vulnerable. We're talking about maybe sex workers. In this instance where prevention, especially using a condom, and sometimes is almost impossible in the financial transaction that they're usually trying to make, the partners tell them you can't use a condom and so forth. How do you convince that kind of community to stop the jobs that they're doing and maybe find a different job to feed their families? How do you convince that community to stop really just putting themselves in danger?
The priority is not even to stop. The priority is to ensure that they are safe, because if they are doing that work, they are doing it for a reason. And if you cannot give them an alternative to an income, you are not going to be able to help them to stop. So the priority for most people working on HIV is to ensure that this community has the information they need to stay safe, that they have the power to demand the use of condoms. They have in fact, actually, they have more power than married women and girls who cannot negotiate the use of condoms in their own homes, and they get infected with HIV. So we educate them, we empower them to know their rights. And as we know, gender-based violence is a big problem in places like Kenya. So gender-based violence has to be addressed so that women and girls can have the power to negotiate the use of condoms. So, and then of course, once they are infected with HIV, we have to ensure that they get the medication they need, and they also get the education they need so that they don't spread the pandemic to someone else. So it is a very challenging situation, especially when you have age 15 to 24 years old girls being very vulnerable, dropping out of school, getting pregnant, and then some of them choosing to do sex work because there is no other alternative.
While we are talking about prevention, one of the challenges is the prevention of the transmission of the virus from mother to child. According to a research done by the National Library of Medicine, for example, about 86% of children newly infected with HIV virus live in sub-Saharan Africa. So what should be the strategy to prevent the transmission of the virus from mother to child?
Thank you very much. I think it should start earlier before even the mothers get pregnant. But once the mother are pregnant, I think the sexual and reproductive health services in each country in Africa, including my home country of Kenya, has to ensure that every pregnant woman is tested. And once they are tested, they are put on treatment. And when their child is born, is given nevirapine, so that the virus doesn't transmit from the mother to the child. I think it's criminal that today, when we have that kind of services to protect children from being born with HIV, that more women are giving birth to children with HIV because they don't have access to nevirapine, or they don't have access to the information they need. They don't get tested before their child is born so that they can protect their child. So all of this requires a lot of education. I think we have governments that are investing in this. We have organizations such as PEPFAR here in the United States that's providing a lot of services to African countries and resources in terms of prevention of mother-to-child transmission. And of course, UNAIDS has identified this as a priority for preventing or stopping the AIDS epidemic by 2030. So I think we are all challenged to make sure that no more children are born with HIV because we have the tools.
Yeah, Dr. Mujina, another question is there a disparity between the number of men and women that when it comes to the testing and medication?
Yes, there is, and we know that accessing those services is still a challenge, especially for the young women and girls, because they need their parental, guidance, or they need their parental input in all of this. So we see that a lot of girls don't access those services, and we also know the vulnerability of girls. So they are more, they get more infected than the boys in their community. And then, of course, we know that our communities lack enough or sufficient counseling services that would actually accompany these women and girls and also other people living with HIV or trying to not get HIV. So we need to invest in mental services in our governments, in our countries, so that we are giving people the education they need to stay safe.
You pointed out that United Nations has a goal of eliminating HIV/AIDS by 2030. Do you think it's attainable, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, given the challenges we just talked about?
We've made a lot of progress, but it is a challenge to all of us. I look at the kids with whom we work in Kenya, some of them living with HIV, and the kind of services that is accessible to them. And I think that we have a huge challenge to reach that goal. We cannot have AIDS-free generation without making sure that we have effective prevention strategies, without making sure that everybody who needs treatment is on treatment. And we know that's not the case at the moment. Also, we cannot have a HIV-free generation if children are still being born with HIV, or if mothers are not tested for HIV before they give birth. So I think I think the World Health Organization itself, UNAIDS itself, is saying that we are on track, but COVID threw us off the track. So now we have to work very quickly to make sure that we get to that back on track and be able to bring the rate of infection down.
That's a good point to end our conversation. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Muchina. Dr. Pauline Muchina is a public education and advocacy coordinator for the Africa region. It's time for another break, and when we return, we have our Women to Watch segment. We'll hear from Monica Gingos, the First Lady of Namibia. We'll be right back.
Health, wellness, sport, beauty, medical breakthroughs. Healthy Living cares about your well-being. What are the main health concerns in Africa and around the world? Find out the latest on coronavirus. Connect with our experts and ask them questions.
How long does the virus stay?
Join me, Linoch Mudu, in Washington, every week on Healthy Living, right here on VOA.
Welcome back. You're watching Our Voices. This week's Women to Watch is Monica Gingos, the First Lady of Namibia. She is the president of the Organization of African First Ladies and the special UNAIDS advocate for HIV and AIDS. She's also won the 2018 Worlds Without AIDS Award. The Namibian Broadcasting Corporation reported that the award presented to Mrs. Gingos was in recognition of her contribution to the global AIDS response and the leadership in supporting the global agenda to end AIDS by 2030. On the sideline of the recent United Nations General Assembly in New York, I had the opportunity to speak with her and ask her her message when it comes to HIV and AIDS prevention. This is what she had to say.
So adolescent girls and young women have a higher propensity of probably double the chance of contracting HIV relative to their age mates. And that's why that special focus. So when we speak about new HIV infections, a lot of them are happening in the age group of adolescent girls and young women. So it's a focus many of us should have, because if you want to reverse incidences of new infections, you really want to target where people are most vulnerable. So prevention is prevention. It's the same for men and women. But for adolescent girls and young women specifically, it's really identifying the very specific issues that make them vulnerable. It could be lack of access to education, lack of access to health services. It could be lack of economic empowerment. So whatever it is that creates an environment where there's lack of agency, that's what we need to fix, because inequalities of whatever nature do impact somebody's propensity to acquire HIV.
She's pointing out inequality, so that's a big problem when it comes to prevention. We need to really ensure that equality is considered when we're talking about prevention.
Yes, as we mentioned in the beginning of the show, progress has been made in the 4 decades the virus existed, but a lot of work remains to be done, as you said, in terms of inequality, distributing resources, reaching out to key populations that need more attention and support.
Right.
Yeah. The other thing is that less women go to the testing centers and to the medication centers, and mostly people who get the HIV/AIDS, as Dr. Mujin said, Dr. Mujina, is girls. So because of the culture, there is a lot of stigma, and they don't get usually on that services, which is really unfortunate. And they are the mothers also who will have the babies.
Right.
And yeah, that put them in high risk.
Right, definitely. And that's our show for today. Thanks to Dr. Pauline Muchina and all of my colleagues. And on behalf of everyone here at VOA, thanks for watching and have a good day.